We now transition to the topic of semantics, or the meaning of signs. We should first note that with any sort of word or sign in whatever signed or spoken language that you're referring to, there are two types of meanings. There's the referential meaning, or what the dictionary says the word means, and then there's the connotation of the sign or the word. That is, while it might be true that you can say that someone is pretty or that they're gorgeous, and the dictionary definition isn't going to be too different, the connotation is quite different, or even more so if you were to use a term like sexy or hot. While the shades of meaning are hard to differentiate in terms that a dictionary could write down, there's a feeling associated with certain words that goes beyond the dictionary definition, and that's the connotation. There are actually two things that connotation can represent. On the one hand, connotation can represent the social meaning, that is, who uses that word. There are certain words that we know are more prominent in certain populations. There are certain words that girls tend to say more than boys. The words that you find in the North, like pop, that you don't find in the South, like soda or Coke, to refer to any type of soda. And there are words that certain ethnic groups tend to use, words that are more common in particular age groups. That's all social meaning. The same goes with signs. There are certain signs that are regionally based, other signs that tend to change depending on your age, as well as signs that tend to change depending on social group. Connotation can also refer to the affective meaning, that feeling that goes with a word. So when you see a word, you might say, that's a word that this group of people tends to use. That's the social meaning, and that's part of the connotation. But you can also see a sign or hear a word and say, that makes me feel a certain way, or that's trying to give a certain emotion. And that's the affective meaning of the word. This is why you might say that something is comfortable, and that has a very similar meaning, at least a similar referential denotative meaning, to the word cozy. But cozy gives this feeling, this very pleasant, very positive, very warm feeling that the word comfortable does not give. That's a difference in affective meaning. Signs can also be categorized into relationships. We've already talked a little bit about this, although we didn't use these terms. We mentioned that sometimes in sign language there's no hypernym, there's no category word, but we have lots of examples of little hyponyms. For example, in ASL we have the sign animal, and that sign animal is a category. It's a hypernym. But within the sign animal, we have different specific examples. We have birds, and dogs, and cows, and things like that. So those are all hyponyms. And we can categorize signs in that way. For example, we have the sign feeling, which is a hypernym with particular hyponyms or specifics being the feeling of love or the feeling of hate or what have you. So we need to be able to think about words in these terms, especially those of you that are going to go on to be interpreters, because oftentimes you'll hear a word that's a particular hyponym in English, and in ASL you may not have that word. You may only have the hypernym, or vice versa. So you have to think, how can you get to that specific meaning? Similarly, signs have synonyms. While it's true that English has more words, it has a higher number of total words, that's called the lexicon, the number of words in English, it's bigger. In ASL, we still have certain duplicates, words that mean very similar things. So to like something and to use this sign, however you gloss it, they mean something very similar. It's hard to differentiate the difference. And those signs are very similar. So synonyms are possible in ASL, although they're not as common as they are in English. Similarly, antonyms occur when words have opposite meanings or very nearly opposite meanings. So we have lots of examples of antonyms in ASL. Just as we have in English. When looking at the meaning of signs, we can also consider the metaphors that undergird these signs. That is, there are lots of signs that seem to imply that meaning is buried beneath something else. And this is the idea that depth is complexity. Now, in the real world, depth is not complexity. If you want to understand land, you don't dig into it. If you want to understand a book, you don't dig it. It's a metaphor. It's this idea that we have that on the surface is the easy to understand and down below is the hard to understand. We use it all the time in English as well. In ASL, you see this. We talk about the depth or in-depth, meaning to understand something completely versus superficially. We talk about analyzing as if we're digging into something. Depth is seen as complexity. Another example in ASL is height as seen as respect. So things that are above being superior, or at the top being the best, or even signs like best moving upward, showing good as being something that's up, and then down being something that's bad. We also have this metaphor that undergirds our sign language, this metaphor that the future is in front of us and the past is behind us. We speak that way in English as well. These metaphors, it turns out, aren't just English or just ASL. They tend to be common metaphors in all languages in the West. And we use this metaphor of time as moving forward quite frequently. Our time signs move forward. We talk about predicting. We talk about looking back into the past. So lots of signs are built around metaphors. These are just 3 examples of those. Additionally, we have certain families of signs that come about sometimes because of a reason we can identify and sometimes because of a reason that we can't. For example, lots of signs related to feeling use this hand shape. So the sign feel, for example, sad, pity, these signs came about. Now we know historically why. We know that historically these signs were compound signs that use the sign feel and then something else. So there was feel and then this sign, which meant pity, which became this sign. So the hand shape assimilated and it took over the sign for depressed, pity, feel. So that's why that sign's there. Similarly, the sign negative, or the sign family of negative signs, we know came about primarily because in Old French Sign Language, the negation came after the sign. So you would sign like not to mean don't like. And that's where we got don't like. Or good not. That's where we got bad. Or no not, which is how we got no. So that's why our negative signs tend to twist out don't like, don't know, don't want. But some signs we don't know why they are the way that they are. For example, the evil signs like selfish, devil, these signs, steal. These signs use this hand shape, and we're not sure what the connection is. This happens in English as well. We don't really know why there are so many English words that start with GL and have to do with light. Think about it. Glitter, glamour, glow. These GL words all have to do with light or shining in some way, and you could probably think of more. We don't know why. So sometimes there's a reason that you can see historically that created the family of signs, like feeling being assimilated into lots of emotion signs, or this movement coming from the historical negation in French Sign Language. And sometimes we don't know the reason, like the evil signs. It's important that you recognize that shades of meaning can be given in ASL. They're just often not given by changing words. In English, we change the word. If we want to say happy, fine. We can compare that to glad, which is a little less strong. Or we can say something more strong, like elated. We change the words out. In ASL, we don't tend to do that so much. Instead, we change the way that we produce the signs. Either we can change the production with a movement morpheme or with a facial morpheme. So we can differentiate between happy and sad, or very happy and very sad. The same with many of these others. Now that doesn't mean that there are no other words. Of course there are. There's the sign thrilled and the sign depressed. There's the sign wonderful and the sign terrible. We can certainly find other ways to show shades of meaning. It's simply that in ASL we normally don't change the shade of meaning by changing out the sign. Instead we do so by modifying the sign with a movement morpheme or with a facial morpheme.